the very same day. Yes, we North Americans really do like coffee. We drink around 120 billion cups a year. After all, drinking coffee is one of life's pleasures, a pleasure that cannot be duplicated.
Did you ever see Larry looking so happy?
Oh, honey, happiness is a vacation. Away from your coffee.
Larry. Oh, Mrs. Olson, he's always ranting about my coffee. But I guess it really isn't that good. Oh, no.
It's mostly women business owners in the industry, but there's quite a few guys in it too. I'm Lori Brewer, and I own Cafe d'Arte. We have 8 stores, and we wholesale coffee and we repair coffee equipment. I've lived in Alaska for 21 years, and I have a 16-year-old son and a wonderful husband. I lived in Seattle, and I opened a espresso drive-thru. It was the first drive-thru in the market. I worked in media at the time and just realized that everything in the market you could get at a drive-thru window, and I wanted to be able to get my coffee without getting out in the rain. And so as I was opening my own espresso stand, I decided to try to make it a drive-thru, which came with many complications, and actually we got it figured out and created a really cute little stand that people could pull up on both sides. And shortly after that, drive-thru espresso bars started popping up all over the Seattle area. I believe the first drive-thru in Anchorage was in 1993.
My name's Francie Bennett. I've lived in Alaska since 1972. I met Lori because I was a media buyer and she was friends that, she had media friends, and we became best friends.
Well, we found out that the Assembly was looking at legislation that would not allow the espresso bars to be temporary structures. And the only way we can function is as a temporary structure because we don't have plumbing into our sites, and we're not on foundations. And so we, when I found this out, I made phone calls to about 10, 15 people in the industry, and that evening we ended up with about, a dozen of us at my house, and we all discussed the impact of it on the industry and decided that we were going to see if the Assembly, if we could have enough impact on the Assembly to see if we could change this before it became an issue and people lost their coffee carts and we lost our businesses.
Well, my name is Tess Stewart Day, and I'm a lifelong Alaskan, not born, but raised here in Anchorage, going to high school. Have been involved in our community and our small business since I was a child. And Lori is a very dear friend of mine. I remember at the Assembly, and I specifically don't remember who, but I recall an assemblyman wanted to take away my coffee. I wasn't too happy with that.
I'm Mayor Dan Sullivan. In my second term as mayor, lifelong Alaskan. Back in 2003, I had the privilege of serving on the Anchorage Assembly representing West Anchorage, and I served for 9 years on the Assembly, and I was in, starting my second term. There was a movement on the Assembly to regulate coffee carts, and there was a very vociferous outcry from the community about whether or not that was something that it was a proper thing to do in terms of land use and other regulations, or something that the Assembly should just stay the heck out of.
I'm Curtis Murphy. I have a PhD from Georgetown University in East European and Russian history, and I'm teaching European history here at UAA. I would say it's a fairly rare part of human history, that most of human history has taken place under despotism and absolute government, and that's been the history of humankind, the majority of the world, since the beginning of civilization. And that the idea that some people beyond those immediately concerned with ruling can participate is a relatively new idea, and it's one that's rather marginal. Up until at least the 19th century, almost no one would have accepted that that would be a normal thing for people to do.
Yeah, my name's Dick Trainey. I live here in Anchorage. I came up in 1971 with the Air Force and never left, and got involved with community councils. And back in 1991, decided to run for the assembly, got elected. I served from 91 to 95. Then George Bush became mayor. Well, it took me out of the assembly. Anyway, I got elected again in 2000, left in 2008 because of this erroneous court ruling that I couldn't run again. The Supreme Court reversed that, said I could run, and in 2010 I got reelected, and I've been on it ever since. I love being on the assembly. You can actually make change that's beneficial to this town. We'd had a complaint from a lot of community councils, a lot of residents, about the proliferation of coffee shacks everywhere. And there was no restrictions with where they could be, or even requiring them to have a foundation on their structure. 2003, I came forward with a little ordinance that would require specific characteristics to be added to it that would have brought it into city control more than they meet the state DOT requirements for a building. What this would have done is require them to have some permanent electrical connections, permanent water, permanent sewer, and better security for the people that work there.
I remember sitting with them and hearing the story and hearing what was going on and wondering, you know, what was behind it and why was this happening, and how could we share the story in a way that would make the assembly understand the impact and not attack, because we want, you know, obviously somebody had thought there was a good reason for this, and we thought that messing with people's coffee habit was a bad idea.
My name's Tom McGrath. This started in 1993, I believe it was. I asked the question, why do some businesses pay business personal property tax, and why don't other businesses pay business personal property tax? I had talked to various people about various types of businesses through the 90s that were outside of the rules that most businesses adhere to, and coffee carts just happen to be one of them. Most businesses, you have a place, a building that has to be built using current building codes. The building would be taxed, you know, for property taxes. There would be sanitary facilities, electrical, heating, plumbing, landscaping, water containment on the site, curb cuts, and then the building would be taxed, and the personal property in the building would also be taxed.
Well, I think the concern was really having equal requirements for those businesses that have to go through an awful lot of Title 21 requirements when they build on a lot, as compared to those who just roll a building onto a lot. So if you build on a lot, you have landscaping requirements, parking requirements, paving requirements. You've got all sorts of codes that apply to your business, but those codes didn't apply if your business happened to be on wheels. And so I think some of the folks that have to pay an awful lot of money to comply with regulations were concerned that these other businesses, sometimes businesses that actually directly compete with them, just because they're mobile, didn't have to satisfy those same requirements. No, I think an ordinance was introduced, and that's what galvanized all the attention, was that, you know, just talking about something, you know, that's one thing, but when somebody actually introduces an ordinance with the possibility that it might become law, then people start taking it very seriously. And I think one of the assembly members did indeed introduce an ordinance that would apply more regulations to coffee carts, and that got folks a little excited.
Coffee houses show up in the late 17th century, and they're part of a consumer revolution. That is, for the first time, people are really actually going out and buying things other than bare necessities, which for the most part they were growing for themselves or making for themselves. Now new services are becoming available. Bookstores, tobacco shops, apothecaries are selling more types of medicine and herbs. Tea, and of course coffee is becoming a drink that Europeans, particularly of the upper class, are consuming as a luxury item. And part of this, of course, is due to the cultivation of coffee in South America using slave labor plantations which means that more and more coffee and sugar are coming to Europe. And one of the mediums for the distribution of coffee is, or are, coffee houses that first spring up in England and then later in France. And in 1721, Montesquieu writes the Persian Letters, and you can already see in this book that coffee houses are a major phenomenon because he comments on them extensively, and many of the scenes in the book take place in coffee houses. A large number of people who are going to these coffee shops or to salons where of course they're drinking coffee are people who don't have the right to vote. In Britain, for example, where only 3% of men have the right to vote anyway, or in France where no one technically has the right to vote or for very limited things. So people are going and discussing things and actually putting some kind of pressure on the government, and there is in fact becoming something called public opinion that no ruler before this ever took into account. And now rulers are starting to take into account public opinion and in fact try to influence it. Even if they're not influencing voters, they're still trying to influence people and get them to support their policies. So one of the ways, of course, is through newspapers, which are, of course, again, read and discussed at the coffee shop.
So I received a phone call letting me know what the Assembly, the legislation that was being considered by the Assembly. So I called some of the busier drive-thrus in town, and I asked them and informed them of it, and we all called back and forth, and we decided to have a meeting at my house that evening and discuss how we could create a grassroots effort to, because we're a city that has such a coffee culture, how could we get the population of Anchorage to really realize what this would mean if the coffee stands the portables would have to close?
And not just not just let them know what was happening, but get them to become involved and get them to talk with the Assembly so that they could, so that the Assembly could get their story.
Yeah.
I do like coffee. I drink about 4 cups of coffee a day.
I love Cafe Yarte, my favorite coffee.
Me like coffee.
I love coffee. I drink coffee every day.
And people love their coffee. As I heard from newspapers that said, please don't do it. I get my hot chocolate every day from one, so I know exactly what goes on. Coffee Cut's full of wonderful niche in society. People love going there. I go there. But it's like anything else. We have to make sure that the workers, number one, are safe. Number two, that the facility meets public health requirements. Now, our health department does check them out.
My name is Alicia Van Scoy, and I own Mocha Masters Coffee Company for the last 14 years. The coffee cart that I opened first was a little, you see them in hotel lobbies and like maybe office building lobbies. They're on wheels, so they're indoors. And she helped me get started with that, and it was still called Mocha Masters. And it was in the Hawthorne Suites Hotel downtown next to Benihana's.
The original idea is that coffee was too strong for the fragile constitution of women, and so only men could go to them. Tea was allowed for women, but in general, we still see this sort of gendering of roles in that men are the people going out into the public sphere and women are largely staying at home, which is why when women enter the public sphere, it's usually at home in the guise of these salons that I talked about, where aristocratic women host gatherings in their own homes, but not outside of the home, of course. The roles that these coffee houses played in the late 17th, early 18th century is as a sort of beginning of the public sphere, the public space. This is where people, mostly men at this time, I have to say, but men could go out and actually talk about politics. The coffee houses not only serve coffee, but of course this is where newspapers were distributed. And so people, for the first time, have a place where they can really go and discuss some of the current events of the day, start perhaps criticizing, in England particularly, the acts of Parliament, or in France, the acts of the monarch. And so there's a beginning of discussion, some people call it sort of rational, critical discussion of actual events. So the public sphere and coffee are intimately connected.
So we sat around and brainstormed on how we could be the most effective to get this information out to the community. And obviously our stands you know, through our windows every day, we have direct contact with thousands of people every single day. And the meeting that we have with these people every day is really important in their lives.
I just remember a lot of customers coming by, and, you know, the coffee shop's not just a place where you get coffee and, you know, food and things. It's also kind of a gossip place, you know. You hear everything. And customers come by and they're like, so what are you going to do when you get shut down? And it's like, what? You know? And then a lot of our customers, I do remember, did make a lot of phone calls and called in. If someone's going to come and tell you, now you can't use your restaurant anymore, you can't do this anymore because the assembly says no, what are you going to do? You're going to fight as hard as you can. You're going to pull together and do what you got to do. Make really good coffee and great customer service. So our customers are our friends, you know, they become your friends. You know, there's different types of coffee shops out there. You know, you have the cafes where you go and you sit down and you whip out your laptop and you do your homework and you don't want to be bothered, you don't want nothing to do with anybody. And then you have the ones like mine where people come through there and, you know, if there's no one behind them for 5 minutes, they'll sit and chat with you and tell you all about what's going on and, you know, just everything.
Heavens, you could get every constituent, every person that drives up to a coffee thing, if you give them a letter that says call your assemblyman, 9 times out of 10 they might do that because they do love going to that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way our system works. I applaud them for doing it.
Clearly be effective, particularly if you're organized and you have a good message. You know, obviously you have to have a reasonable cause to begin with, or else, you know, folks aren't going to pay much attention. But there's probably no better way, quite frankly, to influence public opinion or legislative action than through organized public opinion. And if you are able to get a good group of people to show up at public hearings at the assembly meeting, if you're able to organize you know, good either phone campaigns or email campaigns, using now, of course, social media, which wasn't so prevalent back then, but no, it clearly can be effective.
So we came to the conclusion that we needed to put up posters that invited them to immediately call their assembly person while we were making their coffee and let them know that they wanted to keep their coffee stand open. And so we brainstormed and we made a list of every drive-thru in town, which I believe at that time was 77 of them. And we split them up between us on who had the best connections to each one. And we made a poster within a very short amount of time, and the poster did list the espresso bars by area and who the assembly person was and their phone number. And we also had a letter written that people could just put their name on also to be mailed in, or they could fax it in too.
And not just that, but Lori's husband Bob went out and collected some of the carts, just kept the signed letters, and he went out and collected these letters from the different carts, and he brought reams of letters into the assembly. And at that point, I don't remember who told me, but they said they had never seen a community response to anything that was going on in the assembly like that. So it was pretty powerful stuff. It was very exciting.
Who knows back then? I probably got a few emails, but I didn't consider Barrage any different than, for example, what we're doing now with the Muldoon Park.
Yeah, I think all assembly members did. We heard I got quite a few emails, and just even out and about, there was, I think, at the various coffee carts, they had petitions and, you know, getting people interested in the issue.
There was a lot of correspondence that was sent, and requests to, like I said, a call to action of you know, our Anchorage community here, of what type of community do we want to have? Do we want to have the assembly being able to, you know, regulate small businesses like, you know, or temporary facilities, temporary buildings, and how does the coffee industry fit into that? It was new at the time. This wasn't, you know, every day today where you see a coffee cart every 5 minutes. You know, these were just, they were new and they were coming out, and it was a emerging and booming business. And tell them that you don't want the coffee carts to be going away, that what you think needs to happen for small businesses, that you just can't eliminate an industry because they might not like the look of it. You know, it's not strip clubs, it's not bars. It's not liquor stores, it's coffee.
So within a couple of days, 48 hours, I'm sure, we did have these signs up in every single stand in Anchorage.
I think there was one that said, "Hell no, my coffee can't go."
Every single owner and crew was 100%. There wasn't any, question. Everybody was 100% taking action on this. And every customer that drove up immediately wanted to know what the poster was about. And we would tell them, call them right now. Pick up your cell phone while we're making your drink. And they did, and they were faxing them in. And so the Assembly did receive a huge amount, thousands of phone calls and letters from the public in a very short period of time, encourage them to support small business in the coffee bars in Anchorage.
I had some knowledge of how to do that, and so I offered to help write the letter and help talk to the coffee cart owners and how to kind of share this with their clients, with their customers, and suggested that they go and talk to people on the radio and tell the story. It was just one of those things that, one, I agreed that it was a bad idea because I like coffee, but two, when it's your best friend, and you see the look in her eyes, like, what am I going to do if this passes? I'm going to lose, because she and her husband, that's all they did. That was their life, and that couldn't happen.
But on the other side, you have the 2020 plan, which is, this is what Anchorage wants to be. A book that came out in about 2000, and took 8 years of effort to accomplish it. And then we have Title 21 that came out because of the 2020 plan that just is actually going into place now. So it took another 15, 14 years to get it into place. And it says, we're going to use our land this way. And everybody has to comply with that, except if you own a coffee cart or if you have another type of business. And, so if I have to comply with Title 21 and you have to comply with Title 21, why shouldn't they have to comply with Title 21? Or maybe Title 21 is way too stringent and we should really take a look at Title 21.
That this legislation would have in Anchorage to citizens and business owners in Anchorage. And I wrote up the first draft letter to share with them and went to a meeting, to discuss the letter and to make sure that it was okay. And we invited Doug Van Etten and another Assembly member who I can't remember the name was, but Doug ended up coming to the meeting just to listen and kind of get an idea, a feel for the issue. And that's when we kind of approved the final draft of the letter, and I emailed it out to, I still have it in my email, the coffee group, as one of my group email lists. I collected all of the contact information for getting to all of the radio stations so that they could call in. I sent the press release to the radio stations, and
Pretty sure we did a television interview outside of one of our drive-thrus on the east side of town.
Because when you're talking about 100 people possibly losing their job overnight because of one simple stroke or one simple vote in the Assembly, that's a big deal.
So we had a meeting we held at what was Harry's Restaurant at the time, and we probably had 70 or 80 people at least in the coffee industry show up, and 2 Assembly people, and I believe it was 2 by design. After speaking with most of them, it was clear that they were more than happy, that we had a lot of support from many people on the Assembly. But they showed up. Everybody in the room had opportunity to speak and share information with Doug and the other Assembly person, and they were very supportive of us. And I believe that there was a lot of, I believe they shared that with the different Assembly members, that there was definitely a lot of support to support the coffee industry. And then another thing that happened around the same time is we were coming into a mayoral race. And so at the old 4th Avenue Theater downtown, the different candidates for mayor were up there speaking on the different issues. And they let people in the audience write on a piece of paper, questions for them after they'd each given their small speeches. And so I wrote something about supporting small business and the coffee industry and the current legislation affecting the mobile espresso stands and their views on it. And I think there was 6 or 7 candidates, and each one of the candidates spoke out hugely in favor of the coffee industry and small business and expressed their own desire to be able to drink coffee at a drive-thru. And it was done sort of jokingly. It was interesting that it was the issue that they picked, or one of them that they picked. But I think people, we just, Anchorage, we love our coffee. Again, 70 or 80 of us that showed up to that meeting. They knew exactly who we were. We all wore like coffee shirts. We made sure that we definitely had a presence going in, and we were all expecting to talk about the impact on our business and our livelihood and the employees that we hire in the industry and the impact on the economy of Anchorage. And so right off the bat, in the very beginning of the meeting, it was on the agenda, and one of the assembly people, I believe as they were approving the agenda, made a motion to remove it from the agenda, which was approved unanimously, and nobody spoke on it or anything. And we all went home, and it moved on and never came up again. And I believe my facts are correct on that.
Well, again, there's a balance. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the folks that have similar businesses with bricks and mortars and have to pay property tax and landscaping requirements and all the other Title 21 requirements. They have a good case to make that why should I have to comply with all this and not these people? But at the same token, you don't want to stop entrepreneurship and small businesses from being creative and trying to find a way to provide a service that people clearly enjoy. So it's that's one of the reasons I think the Assembly didn't take action, was because there was just a real split in what was the best way forward, and sometimes the best way forward is to do nothing, and that's what happened.
How attuned should they be? Especially in a place like Anchorage, Alaska. I think that not only would every coffee shop get together, if this were to happen now, we would all get together and fight with our very last breath to keep them open. I think so would the community back us up 100%. And yeah, I think they should listen.
Tocqueville, when he visited the U.S. in the 1830s, said that what keeps America together, or the U.S. and the United States together, is not that the system of government per se, but it's the civic activism of people from the ground up, and this tradition of self-government and the sort of self-appointed watchdog role that people tend to play or to take on in the U.S. that he thought did not exist in Europe in the time, and that in fact democracy in America, this is the book of course, is possible not because of the political structure, but because of the ground up participation. And this, I think, would fit nicely into what Tocqueville saw in the 1830s, because it is true that in many other countries today we don't have the civic activism. People just accept or are passive about things that happen and don't protest. And I think, again, to bring up the Russia-Ukraine thing, because I can't get away from it, the protests in Ukraine are over things that are very similar to events happening in Russia, but whereas in Ukraine people are protesting, going to the streets, in Russia we don't see that happening, or we see it happening at a much reduced level. And so I think there is a certain cultural thing that allows that in some cultures or countries people feel that their opinion deserves respect, and that they have the expectation that the state will take their opinion into account, and in other states we don't see that happen. So I would say that it would fit into this kind of model that we've seen in U.S. history going back at least to the 1830s.
There's a lot of laws on the books in Anchorage that are there because somebody put them on the books and nobody remembers why. Sometimes you push something like this to get rid of unneeded laws. And if I want to, on any given Tuesday night that the Anchorage Assembly meets, at the end of the Assembly meeting, I can go up to the mic and say whatever I want to, well, within reason. Oh, it's a great thing, because if you have a real issue and and you really want somebody to look at something, you can get to them and say, hey, look at this. They might tell you they don't want to, or that it's not an issue that anybody would be interested in. You don't always win, but somebody's going to hear you, so it's good.
I like what we do. I enjoy the heck out of what we do because we pass good laws. And every now and then we introduce something that the public doesn't like. We hear about them, and it's voted down, like this one was. End of story.
I would absolutely help Lori with this incredible outpouring of support for her for the industry. I would absolutely. I still love being involved in citizens taking control, or not control, but citizens giving their input so that the laws and the regulations are written that make sense for people, for people's safety, for people's businesses, for people's livelihood. I'm proud of her for doing what she did.
If we ran into a similar situation in our market in Anchorage that was threatening our businesses, I would be the first one to jump right in there to see what we could do to make change, or to keep things the same, if that's what in this situation. And I really believe that the coffee shops would band together again in a heartbeat to, or any small business to keep their businesses going. And also the community, again, support. People don't want to lose their coffee shops. This whole experience empowered me to feel like that we can make a difference.